PhD student at Indiana University Bloomington in my 5th year, and I study Immanuel Kant. So I'll present something on Kant today. So I'll just start off by sharing a document that will follow along through for my presentation. Okay, so I hope everyone can see that. We'll work through this handout, and though the title is What is Transcendental Idealism? And Transcendental Idealism is a central doctrine of Immanuel Kant's theoretical philosophy. So just starting off with the basics in case no one's studied Kant before, or someone hasn't. So who is Immanuel Kant? So Immanuel Kant is one of the most influential and famous philosophers in history. He was born in April 22nd, 1724, and died February 12th, 1804. So largely in the 18th century. He was born and lived his entire life in Königsberg, East Prussia, which today is Kaliningrad, Russia. And we move on to our second point. Where do we find Kant's doctrine of transcendental idealism? So Kant presents his doctrine of transcendental idealism in his book, The Critique of Pure Reason. I have the book with me here. I think everyone can see, hopefully. And that will be kind of a prop today. So The Critique of Pure Reason is probably Kant's most famous work in the history of philosophy. Where do we find this doctrine of transcendental idealism? Well, we can find it in The Critique of Pure Reason chiefly, among other works, but this is probably Kant's most famous work, is The Critique of Pure Reason, and considered to be one of the most influential and famous works in the history of philosophy, specifically theoretical philosophy. So what is theoretical philosophy? Well, it's largely made up of the study of two disciplines, metaphysics, which just means a study of what exists, and epistemology is a study of what we can know. So transcendental idealism now is one of, if not the central doctrine in the Critique of Pure Reason, certainly one of them, and Kant's whole theoretical philosophy. So now this just gives us a sense of the importance of this doctrine of transcendental idealism. We don't know much about its content, but we know that it is one of the central doctrines in one of the most famous and influential works, The Critique of Pure Reason in philosophy, from one of the most famous and influential philosophers, Immanuel Kant. So I hope we can now kind of get a sense for why this might be an interesting thing to learn about. So our second point here is, what is this doctrine? What is the content of transcendental idealism as expressed in The Critique of Pure Reason? So we're just going to start out with one passage today. We're going to try and dissect and get a sense for this doctrine. And it's kind of an explicit definition Kant gives of this doctrine. So 2a, we see everything intuited in space and time, hence all objects of an experience possible for us, are nothing but appearances, i.e. mere representations, which, as they are represented as extended beings or a series of alterations, have outside our thoughts no existence grounded in itself. So that's the formulation we're going to look at today of the doctrine. And that was pretty confusing and complicated. So we're going to try and figure out what's going on there. And so there are debates in the secondary literature that rage over how to interpret transcendental idealism correctly. And so my dissertation research is aiming to produce an original interpretation of transcendental idealism that fits Kant's text better than other interpretations. So that's what I'm hoping to do in my dissertation. So I'm going to give you this interpretation today, at least a part of it, a small part of it, because I was asked to come here and talk about my dissertation research. So you have to hear my interpretation. So that leads us to the question, what is my interpretation of this doctrine? Well, let's just start off by saying that transcendental idealism is a metaphysical doctrine, okay? And by metaphysics, because it's been disputed what kind of doctrine is it, I'm going to say it's a metaphysical one. And by metaphysics, I take Kant to mean a systematic science of existence claims that we can make as humans. So these are claims we make as humans about what exists in a system. So there are two senses in which existence claims can be taken for Kant. We can take them as transcendental existence claims or empirical. A transcendental existence claim is a claim about what exists outside of our possible experience for us as humans, outside of what we can experience as humans. An empirical existence claim is a claim about what exists for us as humans within our possible experience, under the conditions of our cognitive faculties. So this is largely a distinction between the transcendental, or being outside of our possible experience, and the empirical, or being within our possible experience. So that's our first important distinction. Each of these two senses of existence claims has a corresponding standard of existence to judge the claim's validity. So to exist transcendentally, or outside of our experience, i.e. to be transcendentally real, something must exist independently of our minds and also be outside of our experience. To exist empirically, or be empirically real, something must exist independently of our minds and also be within our possible experience. Okay, so Kant's doctrine of transcendental idealism concerns existence claims made only about objects that appear to us, or objects of our experience. And objects of our experience are everyday objects that we encounter through our lives, such as this book here. This is such an object of experience. Your computer, your desk, your chair, your pen, these are all objects we experience. Okay. So transcendental idealism is then the transcendental existence claim. Remember, this means claim about objects as they exist outside of our experience, that these objects of our experience are ideal. And ideal means without existence independently of our minds. And this is the opposite of real, which means with existence independently of our minds. Okay. So we're going through a lot of distinctions here. So we can wrap up what we have learned so far and kind of put it together and try and flesh out a claim about what transcendental idealism is to try and make it simpler. So in bold, transcendental idealism is the claim that objects of our experience, all these books and chairs and tables, do not exist independently of our minds when considered outside the realm of our possible experience. Okay, so outside the realm of our possible experience is as God might see the world. Outside of our human minds, have a definition of transcendental idealism that hopefully we can kind of wrap our heads around a bit better. I'll just reiterate it. So it's the claim that objects of our experience, again, we have to think all the objects we experience, books, chairs, tables, everyday objects, but anything you can really point to in your daily experience. These objects do not exist independently of our minds. So by that we mean have this independent existence, right? But specifically outside the realm of our possible experience. So that means outside of what we can experience as, say, God might experience things or look at things. Okay, so when God looks at these objects, he would see, or she would see that these objects are not independent existent things of our mind in that realm, in the transcendental realm. So we'll get more into explaining that though. So hopefully we can now try and understand Kant's definition of transcendental idealism that we quoted above. And so we'll try and go through that again and explain some of the terms. So we can say objects of an experience possible for us. So objects that can appear to us in our experience. And again, just as an example, this book in front of me is such an object of our experience. Okay. These things are now claimed to be nothing but appearances or mere representations, which have outside our thoughts no existence grounded in themselves. So again, when considered transcendentally, as they would be outside our experience. Objects of our experience, like the book, are mind-dependent determinations of the subject that do not exist independently of our minds. Okay, so we might ask now, because this seems kind of strange, how are these books and pens and cell phones and everything, things that don't exist independently of our minds transcendentally, but also they also do exist independently of our minds? I mean, this book, I'm not, it's not a dream book. I'm not, I can't change the book's determination just by thinking of it. So what's going on here? It seems a bit confusing. We're going to try and clear that up. So how are objects of experience also empirically real? So Kant also holds about these same objects of our experience, these books and tables and chairs, that they are empirically real. So empirical realism is the empirical existence claim, or the claim about objects as they exist within our possible experience. So within our experience, that objects of our experience are real. So real means exists independently of our minds. So we now get the claim about what empirical realism is the claim that objects of our experience, these books and tables and chairs, exist independently of our minds within our possible experience. So the key is that we can consider them to exist independently of our minds. We don't determine them with our thoughts. We don't make them what we want with our whims. But that all happens only within this realm of our possible experience, only inside this realm, right? But if we're to leave that realm, like in some religions, Christianity, your soul might leave that realm. Then you would see these things don't exist independently of our minds. They depend on our minds for their existence. Okay. So we can say, even though objects of our experience exist independently of our minds only within our possible experience, Kant thinks they're still real, right? So we've said they only have this independent existence, this reality within our possible experience. Kant says that still makes them real, whereas we might think those are not real. But Kant makes this claim because he thinks our possible experience is the ultimate realm of existence and reality for humans, instead of transcendental existence outside of our experience. So in the tradition of Plato, we can see Plato has an opposite conception of what the truly true or the really real is. If we consider his cave allegory, what is really real or truly true for Plato are the forms, if we've learned about Plato. But these are things that are permanent, things that exist universally and eternally, unchangingly, and they exist in a heaven, another realm, right, outside of our experience. And those are what are really real. For Kant, it's the opposite. Kant thinks that what is within our experience is what is really real. And that's all we can kind of talk about. So objects of our experience are ideal and real. How is that not a contradiction? So again, it's true that objects of our experience, all right, our books and tables and chairs and cell phones are ideal in one sense and real in another for Kant. And that's what I've been trying to get across. So this is not a contradiction because they are ideal in one sense and real in another. So if we can take something in more than one sense, we can avoid a contradiction. That's what we've been trying to do today. So they are real objects of our experience, meaning they exist independently of our mind, meaning that we can't determine them with our thoughts and stuff, when considered as they are within our possible experience empirically. But at the same time, they are ideal. These same books and objects have a mind-dependent existence. They depend on our minds when they are considered as they are outside of our possible experience, or transcendentally, once we leave the realm of our experience and we transcend that realm. Not saying we can actually do that. This is more for procedure and thought, this so-called transcendence. Okay. So again, as an example, so this book in front of me right here, Empirical Realism, is real for me and for all of us within our possible experience, where what we're experiencing right now. But if the book were to be viewed as it exists outside of our possible experience, from a God's eye view, then it is seen to be a mere representation or product of our human mind that does not exist independently of our human mind. So was first captured, I guess, kind of this distinction between inside and outside experience, right? Empirical or transcendental. With the cave allegory, we can think of more contemporary representations of this distinction in the movie The Matrix, for instance. We've seen that when you're inside the matrix, that's more of a realm of what you experience, right? And then when you leave the matrix, you're transcending that realm of your experience. Okay. So that at least that division maps on. A lot of the other stuff in the matrix will not map onto this. The computer generatedness, for instance, is not something Kant holds. But I'm just trying to get you to wrap your head around a distinction between being within your experience and then transcending that realm, having these two kind of realms. Okay. So finally, we can say, okay, I understand this, but it seems to raise a lot of questions. So you may have your own questions, but a couple might come to mind. Why would someone hold such a position? Seems kind of crazy. But Kant has many arguments for this position, which I can't get into, but he does argue for it with many different arguments, which we could get into in the questions if you like. What is the relation of objects of our experience as appearances to things in themselves outside of our experience? So we know objects of our experience are things that appear to us, and we encounter in our experience and we experience them. Food, books, chairs. But there's also objects in themselves we can think about, objects that would exist even outside of our minds, transcendently. So what's the relation between these objects in these different realms? And so this is a related issue to transcendental idealism, but strictly speaking, our doctrine of transcendental idealism we've been covering today is only concerned with the existence claims we make about objects of our experience, objects that we experience in our lives that appear to us. And it does not concern existence claims about things as they might exist in themselves outside of our experience. So this is one thing that the secondary literature is really concerned about. Whenever transcendental idealism comes up, we're trying to say, how are these things related, what we experience versus the object as it might be in itself outside of our experience. And strictly speaking, transcendental idealism doesn't get into that, but they're related and interesting questions. And the questions are often, are these identical objects? Are they causally related? What's going on? So I won't get into that because that's a huge debate, but just to note that it's not properly the doctrine of transcendental idealism. So that concludes my presentation for you. So thank you.